523 on 710 KURV. Roxy, Zach, and Dave. The Trump administration violated the law by withholding Ukraine aid, according to the Government Accountability Office. Joining us on 710 KURV is Dr. Nathaniel Cogley, who teaches political science at Tarleton State University. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Cogley. Now, what does this do? Does this throw a wrench in this whole impeachment inquiry or impeachment hearing?
I think the coincidence of the timing on this is skeptical, right? So the Impoundment Control Act authorizes the Comptroller General to play a significant role in helping the executive and legislative branches resolve this kind of dispute. If there's a temporary deferral and the president doesn't send a special message, Comptroller General is supposed to send a report that is supposed to be interpreted as a special message. And if the president's supposed to obligate funds and he's not, the Comptroller General is supposed to bring a civil action in U.S. District Court in D.C. The Comptroller General did none of these things, right? So he is who's supposed to take lead in resolving this dispute.
So he's pretty much the law when it comes to this Impoundment Act.
No, he's just procedurally supposed to help resolve this dispute.
Or the one in charge, okay.
Well, he would send a report that allows the Congress to pass an impoundment resolution, or he would bring a case in U.S. District Court in which the Trump administration would be able to defend itself and the court would reach a verdict. So none of these things happened, and yet half a year later we see his office release a decision on the day that the impeachment trial happens in the Senate that basically self-exonerates his own office for not doing any of the things the Impoundment Control Act ask it to do, and also takes the president's lack of a special message, which is a minor point that can be resolved through an impoundment resolution or a case in district court, into a big impeachable offense that violates his faithful execution of the office. So the idea that this is like a nonpartisan group making a nonpartisan decision, for me, people should be very skeptical. The Comptroller General is Gene Dodaro, appointed by Barack Obama and a Democratic Senate in 2010. We see the Congress being partisan, and it's no surprise that now the Government Accountability Office, controlled by Democratic appointments, and the Office of Management and Budget, controlled by Republican appointees, are now bickering over the law.
So is it safe to say, that the comptroller, that they decided to withhold if he did anything wrong until now because they knew at the end of the day this is what they wanted to do, was to see if they can find a way to impeach him and have evidence to do so?
I mean, my reading of the act says the Comptroller General failed to play his role, and yet half a year later, on the day that the trial starts in the Senate, it's a self-exonerating report. They can't release their report because they don't have full information. But the act doesn't ask them to report full information. It asks them to report available information. That's missing from there. Also, the role that they do in beginning a civil case in district court is completely missing. They can't say that the president and the Office of Management and Budget were illegally deferring funds, and then say at the same time they had no role in addressing that situation. They're trying to have it both ways. I just find this to be another, partisan statement coming out of a federal government that's too overly partisan right now.
Yeah, this is Davis Rankin. Too overly partisan now. What? How does one know that? I guess is the question. I'm not disputing it. I'm just saying, how does one? Because if you ask them whether they're Republican or Democrat, you can look and see how people vote, but you can't. How do you figure out whether they're not being fair or not?
Well, they're just leaving out clauses that don't make them look good, and they're trying to spin little things into big things, and coincidentally on the day that the trial starts. And we see immediately a lot of Democratic senators saying, this is a bombshell, this is a game changer.
They thought he did it anyway. They don't need. I mean, they believed he did it anyway. They don't need the budget office to tell him he did it. They're not going to. Maybe I'm being cynical. They're going to go, oh my gosh, I didn't realize. I've changed my mind.
But right, Dr. Cogley, the Impoundment Act makes it so that Congress has to know if President Trump were to withhold any aid from any foreign country, right?
Well, it asks if the president wants to temporarily defer within the fiscal year, which Section 684 allows him to do, it asks him to send a special message to both houses of Congress notifying them why he's doing that. People have cited the lack of a special message from the president as a violation of the Impoundment Control Act. That may be so, but Section 686 only says that if the president doesn't send the special message, the Comptroller General issues a report that is interpreted as a special message. So the lack of a special message isn't an impeachable offense. It's just a thing that enacts Section 686, allowing the Comptroller General to do it.
That's what they are saying is what they broke the law, is not sending the message?
Yeah, and they're saying that he didn't send a message, and therefore he's not faithfully following the laws, and therefore this is a big constitutional crisis. And by the way, they don't own any of their responsibilities under the Impoundment Control Act.
So if they
it's just a self-serving statement coming out of the Government Office of Accountability.
If they know that the message was supposed to be sent by this other person, the Comptroller General, if they were supposed to send it and they chose not to, why aren't they in trouble?
Well, in their decision today, which is, of course, their own office exonerating themselves, they say they're still awaiting information on potential impoundment. I find this, disingenuous because the Impoundment Control Act says that they should use available information, not total information that they want. And also, there's no potential here. The funds were released half a year ago.
Joining us on 710 KURV is Dr. Nathaniel Cogley, talking about how, according to the Government Accountability Office, the Trump administration violated the law by withholding the Ukraine aid.
So what do you think is going to happen next? This may have been big news or attention grabbing 2 weeks ago, but now with all this other stuff going on, and with Bernie and Elizabeth Warren going at it, it's not very exciting, and that.
Right. So we're now overlapping an impeachment trial in the Senate with Iowa caucuses and New Hampshire primary, and there's all this type of stuff. I'm going to try to complete a third op-ed on the Impoundment Control Act now that the GAO office gave me something to work with.
Yeah.
And we'll see this trial unfold. It's probably going to be a 3-week to 5-week trial.
Good Lord.
Depending on whether or not they call witnesses after the House managers and the president's attorneys make their cases. But you're right, Davis. We got an primary election for president that's going to grab a lot of people's attention. And it also highlights the point of how ridiculous this is to impeach a president with the election so close.
What's going to take him so long? Because I can't figure out what's going to take so long. If I say a paucity of evidence, what's going to take? It doesn't take 5 weeks to put all that stuff out there and then hear from the other team. I don't think anyway.
Yeah. So first they officially began. Then they need the oaths of office, and the rules are established. Then we get about a week for trial briefs. And then we'll get about a week where both sides can make their arguments. The House managers will make their arguments, and then the president's attorneys will make their arguments. Then the senators get to ask questions of both sides, and they can't vocalize those questions. They have to write them down. They have to stay silent and write them down.
Thank the Lord for that.
Yeah, right. And you're right, because on the House committee side, we saw the House members being very vocal and partisan. The senators are going to have to submit on paper. And then we'll get an opportunity to have a dismissal vote after they've heard both sides. And if they don't dismiss, they'll get to the question of witnesses. At that point, we're like 3 weeks. If they choose to do witnesses, you have another week for witnesses. Then you have closing arguments and deliberation, which will be your 5th week, right? So 3 to 5, depending on how this goes.
And so let's assume sort of the worst case scenario you just mentioned. Where are we then? In Texas, we have Election Day, March the 3rd. It's Super Tuesday, so a lot of places are having elections. If you're running for the Democratic nomination for president, you don't want to be in the Senate listening to all this stuff or having to stick around.
This could run through like February 20th or so. I mean, we're looking at 5 weeks away. And people have noted that this is not good for Democratic senators running for president. Of course, some of them have dropped out, but you still have Bernie Sanders,
Klobuchar
Elizabeth
and
Warren, and Amy Klobuchar in there. But guess what? Nancy Pelosi might not be rooting for those Democratic senators running for president. She might be supporting Joe Biden, who they're both old school establishment Democrats. So it's going to hurt the Democratic senators, but not all the presidential candidates who might relatively benefit if those Democratic senators are distracted.
Dun, dun, dun. Next
shocked.
time on the drive home. Dr. Cogley, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. That is Dr. Nathaniel Cogley, who teaches political science at Tarleton State University, our guest on 710 KURV.